Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So for ages I kept on saying I'd do a video about gearing in Warlords of Draenor, but time went on and I never got around to doing it. So now I think it's probably time to get around to doing it, because gear is, it's a funny thing in Warlords of Draenor, and I think that they made a lot of good changes. I actually do like the removal of reforging from a fundamental level, and when a bit of non-enchantable, non-gemmable gear it just drops, I like just being able to click on it in my bags and continue on with my raid, and I think that feels really good. So the core idea of what Blizzard really wanted to do with gearing, I think was pretty good, because basically they didn't like the way you had to go through a million different steps with every bit of gear you got, to make it actually usable. I like that idea. I don't think that was maybe the best thing. However, because of a whole bunch of other changes and things that have happened in the past, I don't think that it's really made that amazing a gearing system in Warlords of Draenor, and I think where this discussion really starts is in Mists of Pandaria, because all the way back in Mists, that's crazy, 4 months ago, they basically changed secondary stats a little bit. It always used to be the case that your primary stats were the bee's knees, right? You wanted a gem for agility if you were a hunter. That's, in many cases, just how it went. But as time went on, they actually rebalanced secondary stats to make them really powerful, to the point where your gems were going to be, pretty much all the time, from what I know, secondary stat based. Now, I actually think this had a bunch of really, really cool gameplay sort of benefits, because if you look at the secondary stats, a few of them are actually really fun. We've got haste, that makes you do things faster. Then you've got crit, makes big numbers appear. Who doesn't like big numbers? I like big numbers. Plus, crit can actually play into the mechanics of a bunch of classes. And I think those two are really the two very cool ones. But it meant that as you sort of statted out your character and reforged your gear, you'd actually have a noticeable difference in how you played, and I think that was a really good thing that sort of came from making those secondary stats really powerful. But then you jump into Warlords of Draenor, and what did they do? Well, they added versatility and they added multi-strike. I don't think either were needed. I mean, if you look at multi-strike, it's very contrived, right? Haste and critical strike. A critical strike, you shoot your enemy in the neck, or your fireball hits them in the, I don't know, place where fireballs shouldn't be. They are sort of very, is holistic the word? But they make sense, right? You can do something faster, you hit your enemy harder. But multi-strike? You shoot an arrow, and a second arrow, fucking, I don't know, pops out of your ear and hits them in the head. It's contrived, it feels like a sort of bizarre thing. And that said, though, I think multi-strike, in terms of gameplay, can actually be really fun, so maybe it does have a place. But then you've got versatility. What the hell is versatility doing? I know they wanted to make it a stat that was sort of pretty decent for everyone, but not amazing. But here's the thing, all of the stats were like that anyway. The only difference now is that maybe instead of haste being at the bottom of your stat priority list, it's versatility. And the whole idea of, versatility helps you soak up damage as well. Guess what? If you're a tank, because of riposte, crit will still help you, even if it's not the best thing. So yeah, versatility, not really something I'm a big fan of. And I think that what happened is they just added in more variables to the gearing system. And simultaneously, while they added in more variables and things that could sort of go wrong, so to speak, they took away our control over those variables. So in the past, if, say, I'm a hunter, right, which means that a bit of haste mastery gear is, literally the worst thing in the universe that could happen to me. Back in the past, though, I could reforge that, and maybe I feel a little bit better, whereas now, you're kind of stuck. And then another point, of course, is the Diabloification of loot, where it can be warforged, it can have a socket, it can have fucking bells, whistles, tertiary stats, the whole works. All these things are just sort of more variables to make a bit of gear sort of good or bad or worse or not worse, and you've got no real control over it, which I think just doesn't seem to work that well with players right now. And again, one of the reasons for that is because of the way the stats are balanced, and also the fact that for many stats, there is a really many specs even, there is a really noticeable difference in power between one secondary stat or another. I remember looking at the priorities of a survival hunter and just seeing how ridiculously high multi-strike was and thinking, well, I can't play this spec because my gear doesn't have that much multi-strike. Crap. And it's a bit strange, isn't it? The idea of gear actually very much deciding what spec you play. That's weird to me. I've always, thought that your spec choice in an ideal situation should be a gameplay choice, right? You should be playing whatever spec you find to be the most fun, not the one that the current gear is okay with. Now, another point about gearing as well, and this is more of a pre-raid point. I'll make a few points about gearing during raiding in a minute. So, pre-raiding, I think the gearing system's a bit, it's got its good points and its bad points. So, I think one of the really good points is that it's really varied, right? There's loads of different ways to get gear, and that's pretty awesome. But one of I think the bad points about it is that a lot of it is sort of based off random things. If you go into a heroic dungeon, what you find is, well, the loot that you get from the bosses is basically randomized in terms of its stats. It's not technically, they do have a loot table, but there's just so many different variations. And then on top of that, you've got Warforged, etc, etc, etc. And then, as I said, because of the relative power of the secondary stats, basically a good item like a 636 could be better than a 645 if it's right, it's maybe got a gem slot or whatever. And I do think that's a little bit strange. There's a whole bunch of things playing into this, really. I think there's definitely a bit of a perception issue that goes throughout all of this, because as players we think, I must be best in slot, my stats must be perfect, else no one will respect me. That's not really true, I suppose. Like, as long as you do good damage, then you're okay, and if you can make do with suboptimal bits of gear, then fine. But there's definitely perception there, right, that everything needs to be best in slot, because for the longest time, we were always able to make something at least decent. We never really had to settle with bad gear, because a bad bit of gear could be reforged to the point where it wasn't bad anymore. Whereas that can't happen. A bit of gear truly can be bad, so to speak, and for example, you could get something with terrible secondary stats, but Warforged sockets, and then you're just a bit sad. Though it's probably still a decent bit of gear if it did proc both of those additional things. So yeah, there's that kind of like random element going on, you don't have as much control over it, and also on the topic of secondary stats, I'm just going to tie it into Apexis gear. Much of the Apexis gear is useless for many of the specs because of the stats. I think it was Heal versus Babyface who flagged up something with Warlocks where the Warlocks love their crit. Their Apexis gear just doesn't have crit on it. That seems a bit off to me. So there's a lot of little problems floating around the place with the gearing system. Though, like, I think honestly, it does just reach the stage where you have to just get over it, think, right, this is how the game is, and then continue on. I would like some control over things, though. I think it would be pretty cool if they could maybe add in an item that would allow you to re-roll things. So let's go back to that Apexis gear item, problem. If Blizzard are going to, throughout this game, just give us randomized bits of gear and then sort of put that Apexis stuff on a vendor and have the Apexis stuff be useless to many specs, maybe give us a bit of control over it. I mean, hell, for our crafted gear, we do have control over the stats there. However, it of course can feel like a bit of a kick in the teeth when you spend all your resources on this bit of crafted gear and then its stats are completely naff. That's not fun, right? So this whole randomized element it's a bit strange, isn't it? I suppose they wanted a loot system that's a bit more dynamic and immediate feeling and sort of instant gratification-ish. And instead of maybe in the past us getting less bits of gear, but when we got them they were really good. And, that's how it used to be, whereas now we're just getting gear all the time. It's like Diablo 3, you just play the game for 2 hours, you've got a bag full of gear, and it's like, yeah, I procced a chest, which is the same item level, but with better stats and more things on it. I suppose they're just changing that design a bit, and I've got to say, I preferred the older way of doing things. I don't know, maybe it's a meme at this stage, YouTubers saying they like the old way, but I've always maintained I definitely have good memories of, and I know memories are susceptible to rose-tinted glasses, etc., but I think the gearing is more of a journey in some of the past expansions, and I think a part of what's eroded that is the fact that gear has become so dime a dozen, and all this randomized stuff and things proccing all the time just means that it feels like it's a thing that you just sort of churn through. Now, I suppose for the pre-raid experience, the only other thing to really talk about is the garrison mission gear, right? That stuff that you get via the tokens. Again, it's susceptible to the same problems as any of the other bits of randomized gear. It's randomized, right? And you've got no control over that randomization. And again, it just comes down to that fundamental point of we're used to having best in slot gear, we're used to having a lot of control over it, but it's not all our fault because Blizzard did create that exception, but more importantly, they kind of reinforced it with the design of the game by making those secondary stats so powerful, and making the gap between them so powerful as well. And then, of course, by adding in even more secondary stats, which I personally don't think were really needed. I mean, come on, they said they were simplifying things, yet they just added in random stats because, hey, random stats, how fun. And they did all that, which means there's more points in which things can go wrong. And I just think that's really led to a lot of the problems that we've got right now. It's not that removing reforging itself was a terrible idea, it's just that a lot of the other decisions didn't take that into account, right? Secondary stats could be so powerful because we could sort of reforge and tinker around with them. Yet that's kind of gone, so I think rather than reintroducing reforging, what they need to do is have another look at stats. Though I suppose that is a bit problematic because changing up stats is really quite a fundamental shift. I think we're probably stuck where we are at the minute in terms of the rest of this expansion, but maybe in the next one they'll have another look at stats. I think versatility can go, and maybe if multi-strike is key to a few specs like it is for, say, the Elemental Shaman, maybe it can stay. But yeah, there'll definitely need to be some work sort of done in that area. Now let's talk about raids, because there are one or two points about raiding as well. So, this expansion launched with a split raid tier, with High Mall coming out first and Blackrock Foundry coming out in like 6 or 7 days as of the time of me recording this video. Now, what that's done is essentially meant that the loot tables are a little bit funny. In High Mall, you've only got 7 bosses. You've only got 7 bosses of loot, and if you look at how many loot slots there are in your character, you're getting maybe 1 or 2 bits of loot per slot. Usually 1. And that means that you're going to be stuck with a lot of gear that just sort of feels bad to use, and because of that, High Mall is going to favor some specs over others. I think that really does rub people the wrong way. If we look at, say, Siege of Orgrimmar, which was a truly ginormous raid in terms of the amount of bosses, there was enough room there in the bosses to give maybe a bad chest piece, a good chest piece, and then a really, really awesome one that was maybe best in slot. And well, that's not really the case anymore, so I think a lot of people have had to just deal with not having the best stats, and then I think they've also had to deal with not being able to play the spec that they really want to because of the stats that are available in High Mall, which honestly I think is a little bit of a pity, and as much as I hate to say it, you know, if reforging was here, that wouldn't be as much of an issue, because what reforging can do is it can bring up the bad gear so it's not super bad, and you can kind of sort of homogenize things out to a base level of decency, which means that you can play whatever spec you want. That said, of course, I don't really like reforging because it just feels like busy work, and the solution to this is in making the stats a bit more balanced, and then maybe even allowing stats to be more of a gameplay decision. So in terms of other things for High Mall, I suppose we have got the situation now where you can proc a gem socket, you can proc the, what are they called, tertiary stats, yes, and you can also be Warforged. I think, again, you know, that's just adding loads of different variables there, but I find it hard to think it's a giant problem when we've got the statistics issue at the minute. I don't really mind the Warforged system, I think it actually can be pretty fun, so that's okay with me. And actually, I think there are a few good points that were made by the developers, because a lot of people were saying, well, hey, come on now, you're introducing a lot of RNG, you're introducing a lot of luck, and, you know, what's this like for balance in terms of progression and things like that, and what the dev said was, yeah, okay, a tiny bit of change can happen if a guild gets particularly lucky with Warforged, but in reality, that's only a few item levels for a few players, and what makes far more of a difference is the actual luck of getting a piece of gear. And I think, you know, for a large part, I do see where they're coming from and mostly agree with it. I don't think the Warforged system is like necessarily completely needed, but I don't think it's, you know, literally the spawn of Hitler either. Whatever, it's a thing, I just don't really mind. And I suppose a large part of that does come from the fact that I raid heroics, right? I don't raid mythics. Maybe if I raided mythics, I'd have a different perspective on it. And I think the perspective of the mythic people is absolutely a very valid one, because I've always believed that a game like WoW should have a really, really solid top end, like very top end, and ideally, you know, by having that, it would sort of help and inform the other content. Hell, maybe they can make it so that mythic gear just didn't get Warforged or something like that, because, you know, like a piece of heroic Warforged gear is not going to be better than a piece of regular mythic gear, and if the people who raid mythics just don't like that system at all, well, they're still going to be the most powerful players if they're in mythic gear, whether it's Warforged or not, so maybe they could tone some of that stuff down for Warforged as a specific case. And I know that making tuning changes to specific things like that isn't really Blizzard's MO. They just want the same way of doing loot throughout everything. Mythic isn't the largest proportion, and it's also a very well-informed portion of players, so maybe something like that would work, and it would be nice for the overall balancing of how gear's done in Mythic. But you know what? I'm not a Mythic player, so is my opinion really that valid when it comes to the Mythic stuff? The answer's no, it's not. Just some random thoughts that came out. But anyway, I think that's really most of what I want to cover for this gearing discussion. I know it's a little bit of a ramble, but I think that it's a kind of hard topic to do, and I don't really want to script it because, honestly, I don't have the time, and I try to avoid scriptish things when I can because it's all about being a bit more, legit and yourself. So I think in conclusion, gearing in Warlords of Draenor is strange. It's as if Blizzard made some good moves and then sort of stabbed themselves at the same time. Basically, they took a few steps forward and then they shot themselves in the foot. That's kind of what they've done with a few systems. So what they need to do is step back, think about things, think about why reforging kind of worked when there were more powerful secondary stats, and then think about how they can tweak the current sort of selection and plethora of secondary stats to the point where reforging isn't something that players feel like they really, really need. Because, hey, if one secondary stat is literally half as powerful as another one, or nearly half as powerful, that's going to be weird for players, and they need to take stuff like that into account. But anyway, that's really it for me. Let me know what your experience of the Warlords of Draenor gearing process, or just, statting, I suppose, itemization process has been. And if you are a Mythic Raider, what sort of changes would you like? And would you be in support of the idea of just having Mythic gear being the best, but maybe just having Mythic gear not be applicable to so many different affixes so that the playing field at the very, very, very top end is a little bit more leveled out, I suppose, or something like that. Anyway, that's really it for the video. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.